Welcome to Matchback Systems podcast. In this episode, we're happy to focus on the trucking sector. It's a pleasure to introduce our guest today, Bob Leef, who's Senior Vice President of Intermodal Operations at Container Port Group. Now, Bob's got a wealth of experience in the industry and will definitely help us spotlight the wonderful world of trucking. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time to talk with us, Bob.
Well, thanks, Heather, and appreciate the opportunity to spend some time and talk on the phone today.
That's great. So let's start with an introduction to Container Port Group. Can you give us a little background on CPG and its services?
Sure. Well, Container Port is part of the World Shipping Organization. CPG, as we're known to everyone, has been around since the early 70s. And we have always been primarily a drayage and CY operator. We're the largest CY operator in the Midwest. And our drayage operation has 21 terminals right now. Primarily, we are east. Well, I used to say east of the Mississippi, but we are in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and then primarily the Ohio Valley, down in the Gulf in Mobile, New Orleans, up the East Coast from Savannah, Charleston, up to New York. Currently, we run about 1,300 trucks, throughout our system, and our trucks are primarily doing all international ocean containers, import and export drayage. World Shipping, been around since the 60s. Our parent company has an NVO division, United World Lines, we call it UWL, as well as a warehousing division, we call it WDS, World Distribution Services. And we also do some work on the Great Lakes with vessel chandlering for commercial vessels that hit the Great Lakes. So our parent company is really entrenched in the international ocean transportation business.
Okay, that's great, Bob. Thanks. So I think it's fair to say that 2019 was a challenging market for trucking companies, and there's still some market and regulatory headwinds that truckers are facing as we head into 2020. And we'd really like to get your take on these. So obviously, drayage is a primary service for CPG. So let's start there. How are things going in drayage? Is there anything that's keeping you awake at night?
Well, certainly 2019 was a challenging year coming off of the capacity crisis of 2017 and 2018. Certainly we saw in 2019 a change in the business. I would say part of it was tariff related and issues with our different governments and countries disagreeing on how to ship. So we didn't see the strong number of imports come in as we have in the past. And we didn't see the seasonalities during each of the seasons in 2019 that we had in the past. I think people have tried to cut their warehousing and done a better job at forecasting and anticipating the needs. So we definitely had a slowdown in 19, and all of trucking did, not only drayage, but obviously domestic. We all know about the crisis, the change of crisis in capacity. But I would tell you that I think as a country, we still have a problem in trucking in general. We are still not bringing in a lot of young truck drivers. The average age of truck drivers today is still probably in the 40s or even low 50s. So we need to start as an industry figuring out ways to attract younger people to get into trucking and continue, because there is still a shortage of drivers, and it's still a competitive market.
Right. Okay.
2020 is going to be the same as 2019. Obviously, we've settled some of our tariff issues, but now we're facing this coronavirus, and certainly that's having an impact right now on ocean shipping. And we're being told that the Chinese New Year may be extended another week, and so that's another week of no shipping. So certainly in a couple of weeks from now, the ports will be a little slower, with less containers coming in and out, due to that.
Right. So let's talk about ports and congestion. I mean, last year ports and rail yards didn't see the chronic congestion that gripped drayage in 2018, and it might be a bit slower at the moment. But there's still a lot that can be done to make port tracking more efficient. What do you see as the issues and potential solutions there?
Certainly, we need some more automation at the terminals. We need to get better at better equipment utilization. Our industry still has a chassis problem. Until we get to 100% truckers' wheels, we will always be faced with chassis splits and the problem of the drivers having to go to make multiple stops to pick up a container and get rid of a container. And it will continue to impact the ability to do matchbacks.
Right.
So I think there's still a lot of room to solve some of the port congestion if we can get better equipment utilization through matchback. Even in the ports that are not strong exports, there are some, and there shouldn't be any reason why people have to go pick up an empty container to make an export pickup. We have plenty of them on the streets all over the place. The key is to get better utilization.
Okay. And then that sort of leads me into the subject of detention and demurrage due to, delays, all sorts of reasons that are out of carriers' controls, like weather or a shortage of labour or equipment. And the Federal Maritime Commission has an ongoing investigation into the causes and cures for these fees. And in fact, you testified before the FMC about this issue. So what's the current status on that, Bob, and what outcomes do you foresee or would like to foresee?
Well, we just finished, the FMC just finished their open comment period. And so now legislation is getting together, and the FMC and the commissioners are all getting together and reviewing all of the different comments that were made concerning this. I think that ultimately the FMC will come out with some type of, not a ruling, but some type of policy where they'll ask the stakeholders involved, the terminal operators, the steamship lines, the drayage providers, and even the IEP chassis providers, to get together in a room and really sit down and come up with a viable process that everyone can follow, that we can agree on, where when we have situations where you described either congestion, weather, labor, vessel bunching is probably one of the biggest causes of port congestion, which happens for various and sundry reasons, which are all out of the control of the BCO customer or NVO customer and the drayage carrier. There has to be a mechanism in place that when these kind of situations happen, that demurrage and detention charges are waived or held up, so that the shipping public is not subjected to these types of increasing costs that affects all of us as consumers.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And talking about costs, let's take a look at some other cost pressures impacting the trucking industry. I think over 400 companies went bankrupt or closed down in 2019, and some cited the price of fuel, fees, as a factor, along with skyrocketing insurance rates as a result of large damage settlements being awarded for truck accidents. What sort of pain are these and other costs causing motor carriers?
Well, you're right, and we've already, it's only January 30th, and we've seen several companies go out of business in January already, and they're citing exactly the things you're talking about. We're seeing these huge jury and judicial settlements against trucking companies. Over $10 million is what we call anything that's a huge type settlements, and we are seeing insurance rates going up anywhere from 30 to 50%. And that is driving a lot of companies out of business, and that's what they're citing is huge insurance costs. Price of fuel up until, I would say, 2 weeks ago had been pretty stable, but actually right now we're all enjoying fuel. Oil today was down to $52 a barrel, and so, certainly fuel has come down in the last 2 weeks, and they're blaming a lot of it, of course, on the virus and the fact that there's going to be a surplus of oil, in the Pacific region, so it's driving prices right now down. But insurance costs are probably the largest increase we've had in a number of years, with more and more of these larger settlements. Companies like us, like CPG, are looking at ways. We are, of course, like everyone, have pretty stringent requirements for our drivers. We take safety as our number one priority in our company. Everyone walks around with a safety button. Our meetings start with safety messages, and we spend a large part of our day just talking to our drivers and office team members about safety and what we can do to help prevent any type of accident, whether it's a vehicle accident, an office accident, a warehouse accident. That's our number one goal is safety. And
well, that sort of leads me into my next question, which is about regulatory issues. So we'd like to get your thoughts on a couple of these issues that are affecting the market. The electronic logging device rule is now fully implemented, and in terms of hours of service, safety, compliance, what impact is this having on carriers and drivers?
Well, ELD's been around now for a couple of years, and prior to that, we did have rules and regulations that a lot of us were following. Certainly, it has an impact because when you talk about the East Coast specifically, in the marine terminals, they're only basically open, generally speaking, a Monday to Friday operation, and we'll say it's generally from around 7 to 4. Some ports are opening on Saturday mornings in other areas, but generally speaking, it's a very limited window. And of course, a lot of warehouses also have limited hours of operation. So it becomes a challenge, because while a driver can drive 11 hours, be on duty for 14 hours, the problem that you run into is he doesn't have enough time to get in and out of the ports, and in some cases the rails, that he can get maximum utilization out of his hours. At some point, we're going to have to, if volume increases and these bigger vessels keep coming into the East Coast, and right now we're seeing the 14,000 TEU vessels hitting us, and some are even larger. I think that at some point we'll have to have the marine terminals open up a little bit more hour-wise, so that we can avoid the congestion problems and help our hours of service.
Right.
So, with taking a 10-hour break, it stops us as a drayage carrier from it really limits our number of hours that we can operate.
Yes. Okay. And another piece of legislation that might impact you is California's AB5 rule. So that's the proposed legislation that would compel motor carriers to classify drivers who are owner-operators as employees and not independent contractors. I know a judge has issued a stay on the new rule because it's not in line with federal law, but for interstate trucking. But if it goes into effect, and other states like New Jersey and Illinois have proposed similar reform, how would this affect dray carriers, Bob?
Well, the majority of 77% of the drayage done in the Port of New York, New Jersey, which is the largest port here on the East Coast, is handled by independent owner-operators. And you're right, being from New Jersey and living in New Jersey, this is a big item right now. The misclassification rules are being thrown in Trenton and being talked about. Our governor just signed a piece of legislation giving the Department of Labor some authority to go in and decide whether or not a company is misclassifying contractors as employees or as subcontractors. It's going to be, if these things happen, basically it's going to increase our costs. Drayage, legitimate drayage carriers that use independent owner operators, we pay fair rates, we pay detention time. Our drivers certainly do very well. They have the ability to be their own business, and that's what these people want. They want to be their own business. They want to control the way they work and how they work and when they work. And personally, I think it's a good thing, and I think they're entitled to do that. I think there was a time and place for unions in our country. I don't know if that time and place is still today. I think most people understand that home life and family life is very important, and being with children is very important, and active in children's lives are very important, as well as education. So I think that giving people the opportunity to set their own hours and work around their schedules is also very important, which is what this kind of does.
Yeah. Okay.
But as far as if the legislation goes forward, we're going to see probably an increase in drayage costs. That's really what's going to happen. It's just going to cost more to do it.
Yes. Yeah. And it could impact the sort of life of a port drayage trucker, presumably.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask you. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that if that happens, then there's going to be more regulation put on that driver, because he's going to have a set number of hours to work, and he's going to have set times to report in for duty and things like that, just like any other employee in a company, that runs 9 to 5, for example.
Yeah. And that's a good lead into my next question, which is that, some people have an image of truckers from smoking in the Bandit with CB radios and speeding along the highway and living out of their truck. What's the reality, Bob? What does the typical life of a drayage trucker look like?
Generally speaking, drayage drivers are not really on the road driving, as you said, the Smokey and the Bandit type, where they're driving across the country. The majority of freight stays within probably a 250-mile radius of the port area. So it's usually drayage that can be performed in one day. So, the biggest challenge that we have as drayage carriers are, obviously, we're dealing with the port area in the port cities, because of the increase in volume of containers that have come in over the last 25 years. When everything originally started, when Malcolm McLean started the business in the I guess it was the late 50s, early 60s, everything was on wheels, and everything, you went into a marine terminal and just picked up a container on a chassis. Today, the chassis have all been pretty much moved off the terminals, and so consequently, without having the freedom of trucker's choice, where we have the different types of door moves and port moves, the driver is forced to go in and out of different depots or facilities, either picking up and dropping off a chassis, and then going into the marine terminal to get the box that he needs put on that on those set of wheels. It's a time-consuming, at times frustrating operation, because inevitably when vessels bunch up, we had a situation a couple of weeks ago in Baltimore where we had several vessels, come in back to back, and we had a chassis shortage, and that lasted about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, where there were no chassis. Of course, the customers are all looking to move their containers, and there was just no available equipment to do it.
Okay.
And it's pretty frustrating for a driver to have to sit and just kind of wait.
Yeah.
To pick up a chassis or a container.
Yeah. I mean, can technology help in any way with this, for CPG and drivers for that matter, with the technology that's available for them?
Technology helps us because we're able now, we use a system called Trinium. It's, we love our computer system. We're able to tie in with the marine terminals, the railroads, so we can see availability. We can see when things become available. Matchback system also works with Trinium, so we can generate reports and look into the future and try and determine where we will have that availability, where we can, as we talked earlier about getting better equipment utilization. I think we need, as an industry, to continue to push technology. We still have a lot of processes within the international ocean transportation that are not automated enough. There's still too many players. The steamship line has to send information to a marine terminal. The marine terminal has to update their system. There's a lot of steps involved. We have to somehow figure out a way to shrink that so that information flow is a lot faster. I think there's some artificial intelligence that we can probably start thinking about in the future, where we should know in advance what's coming. We should be able to forecast that a couple of weeks out, so that we can all look at it and start planning in advance and do better planning. And I think it will give everyone
that happy day will be coming over the next couple of years, Bob.
I hope so.
Yeah. Now, my final question for you is, get your crystal ball out, is what are your predictions for the trucking market for this year? How do you see things shaping up in 2020 and beyond?
Gosh, if I knew the answer to that, I'd probably be playing the stock market more. And the stock market, I think today opened up a little bit down because of, again, the problems in Asia. I think 2020 is going to be pretty much like 2019. I think it's going to be an okay year. I think we'll have, I think they'll, in the drayage community, there'll be enough capacity to move it. But again, where I see the problems happening is when the vessels, people aren't getting into the drayage trucking, they're going into other trucking markets. So when we have the vessel bunching and we have, we create that congestion, I think there will be some stress points where people will have a couple of weeks every quarter that all of a sudden there's a shortage of capacity because everything happened to hit at the same time. And then for the other 8 or 9 weeks of that quarter, it's pretty fluid and moving correctly. I see the economy as pretty good. I think unemployment is certainly low. Interest rates are certainly low. Companies seem to be making money. So I think people are spending. I see that while the housing market certainly hasn't, gone back up like it was in 2007 and 2008, I think it's still pretty good. So I think as consumers, we're all still spending money. So I think that there's no reason to think that 2020 shouldn't be as good as 2019. And unless something happens, I don't see why that would change at all.
Well, Bob, it's lovely to hear an optimistic viewpoint. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It's been really interesting. Thank you, Bob.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and look forward to talking to everyone again soon.
Thanks, Bob.